and welcome to an introduction to responsible AI. We are so excited to be here to present this really important information to you. I am John Gilmore, a senior program manager on Microsoft's Fast Track for Azure team. We help customers on their cloud adoption journeys. Mickey?
And I'm Mihaela Vorvoreanu. I lead UX research and responsible AI education for Ether at Microsoft.
Also, please meet our moderators, Kate Baroni and Niraj Javeri. They're both amazing engineers on our Fast Track for Azure team, and we'll be watching the chat for any questions that you might have. So Mickey and I are going to discuss a lot of resources that are available for you here for your responsible AI journey. So you have access to these resources through these links up here, as well as the QR code.
In this session, we're aiming to accomplish 3 goals. And so as you listen, please listen, pay attention to these. We're going to go through Microsoft's 6 principles for AI, and then introduce our internal policy for AI products, which is the Responsible AI Standard, available for all to use, adapt, or adopt. And third, we're going to talk about a responsible AI maturity model, which can provide a map for your responsible AI journey. But first, to get started, John, can you tell us a little bit about why responsible AI matters?
Absolutely. So, first, what is responsible AI? It starts with a decision to intentionally design, build, and use AI in a way that honors a broad responsibility to people, organizations, and society. Responsible AI describes efforts to approach technology with a socio-technical lens, acknowledging the societal impact of technical systems. Here at Microsoft, while we had already been working on understanding responsible AI for a while, we quickly learned the gravity of what it means to be responsible in a very public way when in 2016 we released an experimental bot called Tay. Tay was supposed to be a friendly chatbot on social media that learned from its interactions to potentially sound more human-like as it went along. Well, Tay went rogue and was taken offline less than 24 hours after it was released. It was learning to say really awful things and then reuse those things in other conversations. The great learning that came out of that experience was that we needed to have a much more responsible approach to designing and developing AI. From this came a corporate commitment all the way up to the CEO level to responsible AI. And the information we are going to share with you today is based on what we've learned and put into practice since 2016. So 7 years of policy, research, thought leadership, and years of rinsing and repeating with our product teams have gone into refining the practices that we have in place today. And this is what we'll be sharing with you.
And so, John, we know that our foundation for our thinking is grounded in these AI principles. Please walk us through them.
Sure. So back in January 2018, we at Microsoft began our AI governance work by adopting a set of principles, this set of principles here. Many other companies, organizations, governments, and NGOs have also created principles. And while there have been more than a couple hundred sets of principles counted to date, most of them converge around these 6 principles we have here. There's a high degree of coming together on the topics that these principles address. So first, we have fairness. For AI, this means that AI systems should treat everyone fairly and avoid affecting similarly situated groups of people in different ways. For example, when AI systems provide guidance on medical treatment, loan applications, or employment, they should make the same recommendations to everyone with similar symptoms, financial circumstances, or professional qualifications. But where does this unfairness in AI come from? Well, each of us as humans carry around inherited biases. These biases affect our decisions and actions, very often unintentionally, which are then recorded in the data that we use to train AI systems, thus perpetuating biases. We need to ensure that AI is fair and not programmed to make biased or discriminatory decisions, which we humans are also prohibited from making. Together with intelligibility, This is one of the largest fields of AI ethics research. This is not a solved challenge. We must first acknowledge the challenge and then understand that there is a significant amount of work that needs to be done to make sure we achieve this goal. So as an example, there was a study that found an algorithm widely used in US hospitals and insurance companies to allocate healthcare to patients had been systematically discriminating against Black people. The study concluded that the algorithm was less likely to refer Black people to programs that aimed to improve the healthcare of patients with complex medical needs than it did for white people who were equally as sick. Hospitals and insurers were using this algorithm and others like it to help manage care for about 200 million people in the United States each year.
And of course, if I can chime in, generative AI seems to be on everybody's minds today, and for good reason. And fairness is just as important with generative AI. Of course, what first comes to mind when we think about generating text or images is a type of fairness harms we refer to as representational harms. How are groups of people represented? Do outputs contain or reinforce unwanted stereotypes? For example, if you're trying to generate an image of a nurse, what's going to be the gender of that nurse? And so we need to pay attention to and try to mitigate some of these harms, fairness harms that come from generative AI as well, large language models, image generation, and so on. But maybe we can move on. Let's see about the next principle, John.
Absolutely. All right, so the next principle is reliability and safety. To build trust, it is very important that AI systems operate reliably, safely, and consistently under normal circumstances and in unexpected conditions. How they behave and the variety of conditions they can handle reliably and safely largely reflects the range of situations and circumstances that developers anticipate during design and testing. Now, here at Microsoft, we have been designing software systems to be reliable and safe for years. But we need to understand that engineering probabilistic systems is different. AI systems, by their very nature, have errors. We must make sure that the technology is reliable and safe. We need to understand not just how accurate or how few errors the systems make, but we need to understand what kinds of errors the systems make. So this has been an important issue for the growth of technologies such as the automobile. The creation of the car led to the development of a number of safety standards over many years that helped improve the safety of drivers, their passengers, pedestrians, and society more broadly. By adding AI into the mix with vehicles and the development of autonomous vehicles, we must take this principle forward to AI as well. This chart here highlights benchmarks created for autonomous vehicles to be considered reliable and safe. The amount of data and the amount of time needed to collect that data is quite a lot to reach confidence levels.
Indeed. And we also need to think about reliability and safety in the context of generative AI. A few examples come to mind. One of them is that of hallucination or fabrication. We know that large language models will output information or will fabricate it that has no grounding in truth or any existing texts. And so this is a problem that we're working on in research. It is not a solved one. And even though some mitigations exist, it is not really something that we can do away with 100%. And so that connects us to the principle of transparency and to how important it is to empower our users of such systems so they can understand that these systems can fabricate information and that it's important to verify it. Another thing that I think is important to teach people about now with the advances in multimodal models, you could show an image to a model and ask questions about that image. Now, one thing that we know doesn't work and is not reliable is so-called emotion recognition. It's one of my pet peeves. In fact, humans cannot really tell emotions based on facial expressions alone, let alone artificial intelligence systems. And so, if you input a photo and then the model tries to infer the emotion of the person in that photo, we know that this lacks validity. It lacks reliability. And so we need to be transparent and help educate people about use cases where AI should not be used, even if the system allows that kind of interaction. But there are many other issues and principles to think about. So I'll let John talk about the next one, privacy and security.
All right. So as Mickey mentioned, our third principle is privacy and security. It is crucial to develop AI systems that can protect private information and resist attacks. As AI becomes more prevalent, protecting privacy and securing important personal and business information is becoming more critical and complex. Privacy and data security issues require especially close attention for AI because access to data is essential for AI systems to make accurate and informed predictions and decisions about people. As an industry, we have made significant advancements in privacy and security, fueled significantly by regulations like the GDPR. Yet, with AI systems, we must acknowledge the tension between the need for more personal data to make systems more personal and effective and privacy. Just like with the birth of connected computers with the internet, we are also seeing a huge uptick in the number of security issues related to AI. And at the same time, we have seen AI being used to improve security. As an example, many modern antivirus scanners are driven by AI today. So we need to ensure that our data science processes blend harmoniously with the latest privacy and security practices. Now, there's a famous story about a Target employee statistician who had figured out how to determine whether a customer was pregnant or not, even if she didn't want Target to know. Now, based on several data points, some public and some Targets, his algorithm was able to identify not only that a customer was pregnant, but the trimester that the customer was in. And about a year after he created his pregnancy prediction model, a man walked into a Target and demanded to see the manager. He was upset about coupons for baby products that had been sent to his teenage daughter, whom he did not know was actually pregnant. And while this is not an example of an AI system, it is an example of a system built on similar data that can cause privacy and security issues. Now, to combat these types of concerns, regulations have been passed, such as GDPR as well, but still more needs to be done.
Yeah, and of course, generative AI brings new challenges in this area. For example, large language models have been known to leak from their training data. And this could happen with personal information, such as someone's address.
Absolutely. All right, moving on to our fourth principle, which is inclusiveness. So for the 1 billion people with disabilities around the world, AI technology can be a game changer. AI can improve access to education, government services, employment, information, and a wide range of other opportunities. Inclusive design practices can help system developers understand and address potential barriers in a product environment that could unintentionally exclude people. By addressing these barriers, we create opportunities to innovate and design better experiences that benefit everyone. AI has the potential to make computer systems more accessible to those who cannot access computers today. And AI must be developed and deployed in a way that can benefit all and is accessible by all. We need to think about this as more than just accessibility, though. This isn't just about building our systems to be inclusive for all, but we need to build our systems inclusively, building the systems with the populations we intend to serve.
That is true. And beyond the populations we intend to serve, it is recommended practice in responsible AI to engage other groups that might be otherwise affected by the use of a system, We call them stakeholders, right, or bystanders. It would be important to understand their needs, their fears, and their interests as we build AI systems. But let me go back to this idea of generative AI. And I know it's our job working in responsible AI to worry and to think about harms and to warn people about harms. But I can't help but express how excited I am about the possibilities of multimodal models for improving accessibility. For example, systems that can translate images into text, you can only imagine how useful they could be for helping people who are blind or visually impaired to navigate their environments.
Absolutely. So for us at Microsoft, these top 4 core principles are underpinned by 2 foundational principles. The first is transparency. People cannot identify whether progress is being made on the top 4 principles unless there is enough transparency around how systems have been built and function. When AI systems are used to help inform decisions that have tremendous impacts on people's lives, it is critical that people understand how those decisions were made. A crucial part of transparency is what we refer to as intelligibility, or the useful explanation of the behavior of AI systems and their components. Improving intelligibility requires that stakeholders comprehend how and why they function so that they can identify potential performance issues, safety and privacy concerns, biases, exclusionary practices, or unintended outcomes. We also believe that those who use AI systems should be honest and forthcoming about when, why, and how they choose to deploy them. Transparency together with fairness is one of the biggest areas of research. Because AI systems are so complex, it can be really difficult to understand how they work and how to interpret the results they produce. This lack of understanding affects the way these systems are managed, operationalized, and documented. It more importantly affects the decisions made using the results these systems produce. So when building an AI system, we need to tell the why. People need to understand why the system did what it did. And then we need to explain how well a system does what we say it does. People need to understand what an AI system can and cannot do, as well as how well it can do what it can do. And lastly, we need to disclose the fact that people are using an AI system when they are using the AI-based systems that we build and deploy.
Indeed. So, with generative AI, right, remember they can fabricate information. And so, not very long ago, there was a story in the news about an attorney who submitted cases that he had gotten from ChatGPT to the court. And it turned out that these cases did not exist. They were entirely fabricated, and the attorney didn't know. He had just heard about ChatGPT, thought it was, one of the newest, most powerful search engines, and it didn't occur to him that it could fabricate information. And so, even though OpenAI has an onboarding screen where it makes that rather clear, it's possible that the lawyer was in a hurry, that this message didn't quite sink in. It is our responsibility, indeed, to help people understand, right, that these systems can make mistakes and what kinds of mistakes they can make. We have tools available, such as the HACS Toolkit, the Toolkit for Human AI Experiences, that helps you plan how your system should interact with users and helps you implement some of these transparency requirements even during interaction with the system. Similarly, speaking of disclosure and understanding that you're interacting with an AI system, we believe in not anthropomorphizing or endowing AI with more human qualities than large language models already appear to have. And so we want to make sure that we don't give them faces or names, and that to the best of our abilities, we remind people that these are machines that they're interacting with.
Definitely. All right. So our final principle, the second of our foundational principles, is accountability. We believe the people who design and deploy AI systems must be accountable for how their systems operate. The need for accountability is particularly crucial with sensitive use technologies like facial recognition. Recently, there has been a growing demand for facial recognition technology, especially from law enforcement organizations who see the potential of the technology in uses like finding missing children. However, we recognize that these technologies could potentially be used by a government to put fundamental freedoms at risk by, for example, enabling continuous surveillance of specific individuals. To that end, we have publicly called for regulation of facial recognition technology and have developed principles that provide guidance on how organizations can use this technology responsibly. Now, this is perhaps the most important of all the principles. Ultimately, one of the biggest questions for our generation, as the first generation that is bringing AI to society, is how to ensure that computers will remain accountable to people, and how to ensure that the people that design computers remain accountable to everyone else.
Yeah, John, I think it's worth thinking a little bit more about what it means for computers to remain accountable to people. So, on the one hand, what's needed for accountability is traceability. And we need to be able to trace if and when something wrong happens, maybe to trace down where it happened and why it happened. In order for companies to be able to do that, they need to have solid documentation practices. And I know this is everybody's favorite word, documentation, but it is important to attempt to understand and document data sets and safety operations that were put in place, to document performance levels, to document results of tests that were done. This can enable traceability. But also on the user side, computers being accountable to people means that we think about full automation, when is not appropriate to do that, and that we make sure that there's always human oversight. But that's also very, very tricky. We often tend to think that a lot of problems can be solved by just putting a human in charge, just putting a human in the loop. However, there's a lot of research in an area that's known as over-reliance on AI. And from that research, we know that people have a tendency to overtrust AI systems because they're big, they're powerful, they operate with so much information, and it's hard to imagine that they could be wrong. And so people tend to accept incorrect AI outputs. Now, we actually wrote a synthesis of this review of literature about over-reliance that not only defines over-reliance, but also talks about mitigations, and also talks about how some of these mitigations can backfire. And so this is an issue that's related to accountability that we need to be closely aware of, because even though human oversight is so important, in terms of human AI interaction, the problem of making that human oversight effective is not an easy one. And it's one that needs to be considered and tested on a case-by-case basis. But back to you, John, and the conversation about principles.
Everything you're saying is so important for folks to understand. So great. Now, we've covered the principles, Microsoft's principles of AI, but we recognize that principles alone are not enough. For instance, they are not self-executing. Your desire and belief that an AI system should be fair or inclusive does not simply make it so. Principles are also open to interpretation. If I asked everyone on this call what fairness means, we are likely to get as many different answers as we have people here. Principles also do not answer the question of how to actually go about implementing them. So what we need to do is put these principles into practice.
That sounds great, John. Can you tell us a little bit about how we put those principles into practice here at Microsoft?
Absolutely. So earlier, I mentioned that there would be a lot of resources and they're available to you, and here are many of them. Now, the principles are important because they answer the question, what do we care about? The follow-up questions, though, are, well, what could go wrong, and who could be harmed, and what do we do about it? These other resources here are available to help you go from principles to practices. At the core of our practices, we have our Responsible AI Standard that is adopted across all product teams at Microsoft and is the guidance on how to take the principles and align them to your AI product. There is a template for how to conduct a Responsible AI Impact assessment, who to include, what questions to ask, how to get the discussion started. And there are also guidelines for designing conversational AI, for inclusive design, a checklist for fairness that describes the kinds of system behaviors that can cause unfairness, guidance for architecting and designing for fairness, and guidance on assessing data for fairness. For machine learning engineers, there's an AI security risk assessment, which is a document to help start a discussion around how to secure AI systems. And for developers, there is a threat modeling guidance for machine learning systems. Now, outside of practices, we also have tools such as the Responsible AI Dashboard. If you are a machine learning developer and developing your own models, once you train the model and it meets an accuracy threshold, then what? How well does it work? Could there be fairness issues because the model predictions are failing for some subsets or groups of the data? Is the model overfitting or underfitting for a cohort of the data? For a deep dive into model evaluation, we have the Responsible AI Dashboard that integrates open source libraries into a single dashboard so you can do model performance and fairness assessment, data exploration, and error analysis. We also have the Azure Machine Learning Prompt Flow. This is an interactive authoring experience for prompt engineering. You can create and evaluate prompts for quality and effectiveness. You can fine-tune them for different levels of creativity or precision. And then, as Mickey mentioned, when you have a user-facing AI system, the Hacks Toolkit can be especially helpful. Two key areas here are, one, in terms of design, this may be an area that a team has not considered before or may not have had practical experience. In this toolkit, there is guidance and design patterns on templates to help with designing an AI system for humans. How people understand your product affects how they use it, their behavior, and how they work with it. And two, as I mentioned before, is the idea that AI systems are probabilistic, and it will make mistakes. From a design perspective, how can a team engage to help? For instance, how do you support the principle of transparency and create and set clear expectations for your users on what the system can and cannot do? Or what can you do from a design perspective to anticipate what could go wrong and how to recover? If a user misuses the system, how do you help them understand what went wrong and how to adjust? What test patterns should be considered for the type of AI systems you have and where it could fail? Now, lastly, encompassing all of this is governance. The governance model we have in place kicks in at the very beginning of the business case for an AI product and carries throughout the life cycle of that AI product. Our Office of Responsible AI and our Ether team have taken years of research, policy, engineering, and practical experience and packed it into documentation such as the Responsible AI Maturity model, something Mickey will dive deeper in shortly. Now, once the principles are in place, the first thing we rely on here is the Responsible AI Standard. It is our internal playbook for responsible AI, and it answers the question, how are we going to put these principles into practice? The guidance is practical and structured in a way that it can be adapted really effectively across all of our product teams. All of our product teams adopt the Responsible AI standards: Bing, Office, Azure, Xbox. So you can imagine that the content and guidance needs to be solid for all engineering teams. The standards set the rules for engagement, but there is room for adaptation and accommodation. With responsible AI, there is no magic wand or simple formula that applies to all product teams. What may be responsible in one context may not be in another context. For example, if we are assessing our products for fairness, Mickey, and their representation of, let's say, gender, and your product predicts a medical condition like heart disease, and my product predicts online banking fraud, will gender be equally significant for both of our scenarios? Probably not. So this is one of those documents that has iterated many times through our product teams before we published it publicly. Consistent feedback from our product teams has been key in making this adaptable, practical, and concrete. So conceptually, the Responsible AI Standard is organized around each of the 6 principles. Each principle is underpinned with a set of specific goals that lay out what it means to align with the principle. The requirements are the concrete steps that need to be taken to meet the goal. And then the tools and practices are resources, guidance, and tools that can help meet the requirements. Now, here's how the standard aligns to each of the 6 principles and the goals for each principle. For instance, a product team will have met the goals of the accountability principle when an impact assessment has been completed for the product, when use cases have been reviewed to determine if any of them meet the criteria for a sensitive or restricted use case. Sensitive use cases like facial recognition for law enforcement, or admission systems for higher education, or predictive maintenance products for safety critical environments like healthcare or chemicals processing, they may impose additional requirements. Another goal to meet is being fit for purpose, meaning that the AI system meets its objectives and service levels. It can mean that the machine learning models that are part of the product are defined and documented. The data governance and management goal lays out the requirements for documentation, and the data is assessed for quality and suitability for the intended purpose of the AI system. And then human oversight and control is making sure that the feedback loops like monitoring or auditing are in place to surface errors or anomalies or other information about how the system behaves in practice. Now, for transparency, the goals are all about clearly communicating capabilities, limitations, and potential risks to all stakeholders, making sure users understand how the AI system works, how decisions are made, that stakeholders have the information they need to make informed decisions about how to use it, deploy it, and operate it are there. If you are the data scientist who developed the model, it may make perfect sense to you, but for other types of stakeholders, like someone on your IT team or a business or a chemicals researcher who relies on your system, they need to understand the capabilities and limitations. Now, under fairness, there are only 3 goals, but the guidance for the standard covers about 1/3 of the documentation. So there are a lot of references and resources to help teams align with fairness. Reliability and safety goals are about minimizing the risk of error. For instance, how is the system being tested? Do the tests simulate the real-world environment and use cases? How will the system respond with a failure or service degradation? In the cases of privacy and security and inclusiveness, we cross-reference other existing standards at Microsoft on the topics of privacy, security, accessibility, and inclusiveness. Your team may have its own standards to cross-reference, or you may want to include things like doing a security review, conducting a threat model, or a red teaming exercise. Keep in mind that threat modeling and red teaming will be a little different for AI than traditional software projects. The basics are the same. What is the input? Where does the output go? What dependencies are there on third-party components? Familiarize yourself with threats that are unique to AI and generative AI applications. AI and generative AI tend to automate processes that rely on human judgment, so you might need more thought around downstream implications. Large language models are non-deterministic and can be tricked. They don't know anything about security, privacy, and confidentiality. Something you may find works best is considering the requirements at different stages of your product development. For instance, if you are at a POC stage, maybe only a subset of these requirements would apply. But certainly when it goes into production, you will want to have met all the requirements. Let's dig deeper here into one of the goals of transparency. In this case, communication to stakeholders. What does a product team need to do in relation to stakeholder communication? Well, the first requirement is that stakeholders need to be identified. The people who are operating, relying on, using the system need to be identified. And for our standard, the tool and practice for getting this done is through an impact assessment. The second requirement is to publish documentation for stakeholders. We need to provide enough information for them to make decisions about the AI product. And the tool and practice for getting this done is a transparency note. A transparency note is a type of documentation we provide that sits between technical specs and marketing material to help stakeholders understand the system capabilities and limitations so they can make informed decisions like, is this service right for their use case? What should be considered when configuring the system? What are the operational or technical limitations? How does a customer optimize performance of the system? And then the third requirement is to keep the stakeholder documentation updated. And it lists the type of events that should trigger an update. This tool and practice is also the transparency note. So as you go through the standard, a lot of the requirements for completing goals are met with a responsible AI impact assessment for the product. Mickey, can you provide an overview of the impact assessment?
Sure, happy to, John. So the impact assessment is one of the core tools that goes along with the responsible AI standard. It is a template, a Word document, but this template guides product teams systematically through the process of asking the core responsible AI questions. What could go wrong? Who might be harmed? How? And how might we be able to prevent these harms? Now, when we talk about this, who might be harmed, right? And this is where we're trying to assess the impact of our system on people, right? But it is really, really important to practice here the principle of inclusiveness. The more people we consider, the more stakeholders we consider who might be impacted by the AI system, the more stakeholders we engage with, not only direct users, but other groups of people who might be somehow exposed to or affected by the system, the better our impact assessment, the more comprehensive it's going to be. And so really you can see how impact assessment and inclusiveness go hand in hand. And it's important to start working on them as soon as we have an idea for an AI-powered product or feature. Now, to actually complete an impact assessment, here are some tips that could help. First, you might want to nominate a responsible AI champ. The responsible AI champ need not be a deep expert in responsible AI, but is someone who can help you navigate this document and navigate, the principles, the responsible AI standard, the words that we've been mentioning that maybe others might not be intimately familiar with. And then, of course, really important to include multi-domain experts and stakeholders. This is opportunity to do user research, stakeholder research, and have those deep conversations, understanding people's hopes, needs, fears, and concerns. Last but not least, it's really important to collaborate and bring to the table a diverse team of people. They need to be diverse in terms of discipline, but also background. There are some things, some potential risks that some people will be able to naturally think about that might not even occur to you because of the nature of your training or your social or ethnic background. And so that's why it's really, really important in an impact assessment to be really, really inclusive. This is going to help you do a better job of answering these broad questions of what could go wrong, who might be harmed, and how.
Absolutely.
And so, to help you practice responsible AI and to help us as well, John mentioned we have a variety of tools. These are just some of them that we could fit on one slide. The ones at the bottom are for people who build and train machine learning models, and they help you work on fairness, interpretability, reliability, and safety. These tools and more are available open source in the Responsible AI Toolbox, and they are also available to Azure subscribers in Azure ML. But I will be talking a little bit about the Responsible AI Maturity Model. We have mentioned the Hacks Toolkit a few times already. Let me tell you a little bit about the guide we released not very long ago, the guide for red teaming large language models. Now, a lot of people who create or who distribute large language models, such as OpenAI, Microsoft, and others, we do red teaming on the model itself. And then you'll see that Azure OpenAI, for example, we have a content safety filter service that's already in place and comes with that model. However, it is important for you, if you are building an application using this large language model, to do your own red teaming. And this is not security red teaming, it is responsible AI red teaming. And so, what you do is you try to put yourself in the shoes of a user and try to prompt the system and see what goes wrong. You identify the types of mistakes, the types of unwanted errors or outputs, and then you know that you will need to mitigate some things and maybe add additional safety guardrails on top of the ones that we already provide. Um, so I cannot understate the importance of testing and pushing an LLM-powered application in the specific context and with the specific types of tasks that you have in mind. But moving on, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Responsible AI Maturity Model. This is a relatively new project, and this is something that my team has worked on, and we also released fairly recently, just a few months ago.
So if I may ask, Mickey, what is the rationale behind building a maturity model for responsible AI?
Yeah, so as you've already probably seen from this presentation, there is a lot of knowledge out there, a lot of tools. The field of responsible AI is constantly moving, growing, evolving, and it is relatively new. We haven't quite had time to process everything and to wrap our heads around everything. And so, with this maturity model, I was hoping to provide a map to this new and complex responsible AI territory so that companies and teams could maybe advance on the responsible AI journey by identifying where they are and, most importantly, deciding where they might want to go.
So how is the maturity model structured?
With a maturity model, John, you typically have to identify the factors that influence maturity. And we refer to those factors as dimensions. And then for each dimension, we show what maturity looks like. If you don't mind clicking the slide, we show here that for each dimension, there might be different levels of maturity ranging from 1 to 5, and we provide a description of what maturity looks like for that dimension for each specific level.
Got it. Well, how did you come up with these dimensions? What was the process?
Well, so we worked on this maturity model before generative AI. We didn't just make it up We didn't ask, a large language model to make it up. It is based on long, hard work that took about 2 years. We interviewed more than 90 responsible AI experts and practitioners over multiple sessions, and they helped us identify these dimensions and the spectrum of maturity for each one of them.
Very neat. Well, what are the factors or dimensions that influence responsible AI maturity?
Well, John, it turns out that there are more factors than I had anticipated. There are 24 in total, and they are grouped into multiple dimensions. So for an organization, they're grouped into these three main categories. To be able to practice responsible AI in a mature way, you have to have your organizational foundations in place. And then you have to have a certain way of working collaboratively. And so I'll provide you a brief overview of the dimensions that are in each one of these three main categories. And we'll start with organizational foundations. Now, in the organizational foundations category, you have dimensions such as leadership and culture, prioritizing RAI. I'll show you that one in a second. But we also have dimensions about, does the company have a responsible AI policy, such as the responsible AI Microsoft standard responsible AI standard that we talked about? Does the company have processes and infrastructure for RAI? Does it make available knowledge resources and responsible AI tooling to its employees? And again, for each one of these, we show descriptively what less or more maturity looks like. But let's take a look at that first dimension for a second, leadership and culture, prioritizing RAI. So we won't read through everything here, but there are a few differentiators in maturity. As companies advance in maturity, what changes is not only how they talk about responsible AI and whether they have a set of principles, but also whether leadership incentivizes and invests resources in RAI. And then at the highest levels of maturity, we see RAI being prioritized in business decision making. So that are some of the differences that you're going to see across these levels. But then let's also look at the middle category, the ones with team approaches. And in that one, we'll see that we have many dimensions related to collaboration. These are dimensions 9 through 15 there at the bottom. And really, collaboration emerged perhaps at the most important part of doing responsible AI well. Now, if you think about it, this makes sense because responsible AI is socio-technical in nature, right? It's a technology, but it affects people. And so the problems that we deal with, the problems that we're trying to solve, involve both people and technology. And so we need at the table the experts in technology and the experts in working with people, such as your UX researchers, UX designers, content writers, and so on and so forth. Now, what became clear is that it's not easy, as many of you know, to collaborate across disciplines. It's not easy because sometimes we don't even have a common language. Think about the word feature and how it means something to a program manager and something else to a data scientist. And so this maturity model teaches us to be intentional and to actually invest energy in how we work together, because cross-disciplinary collaboration is very, very important, but it's also very, very hard. So we need to work at it. Also, in this category with team approach, the top dimensions, 6, 7, and 8, are about the cultural approach and how the team values responsible AI and whether it starts working on it very early in the process. That would be a more mature approach. But let's take a look together at dimension number 8. What is the motivation for developing AI products in the first place? And what we see here that in a less mature approach, the motivation is technology centered. The motivation behind developing an AI product is perhaps the existence of a new technology, such as a large model. As we advance in maturity, we see that the motivation is people centered. We develop a technology because we are solving a need, an established and documented need that people have. And as we advance in maturity, we take a very inclusive and collaborative approach to deciding what those needs are and what needs to be built. And finally, let's look at the third category of dimension. And these dimensions are grouped around responsible AI practice. You'll recognize here some familiar words like our AI principles of accountability, transparency. But also, this maturity model makes clear and validates a framework that we use at Microsoft for dealing with responsible AI risks. And that framework is identify, measure, mitigate. If the mitigation is not good enough, measure, mitigate, and then monitor post deployment, right? And this framework helps you do a better job of staying on top of responsible AI risks. Let's look at one of the dimensions here, the one about identifying responsible AI risks. And then if you look here, and obviously, as we mentioned before, red teaming, right? Responsible AI red teaming is part of risk identification. But in a less mature approach, you identify risks, well, you don't. Somebody else identifies them for you, and you learn about them from maybe the media or social media. And this is what happened to us with Tay, right? But then as you advance in maturity, you have processes and practices in place for risk identification. And those processes and practices are integrated in the day-to-day work of building and deploying AI systems. So you don't really have to think about them, right? They're just a natural part of how you do this. So the maturity model is basically a series of tables, 24 of these tables with explanations about what they mean. And, this is where, you can look at them and then figure out, which are important and what maturity might look like.
Got it. So what is your recommendation for how companies can use this maturity model?
Yeah, so I think there's two main ways. And one of them could be simply for orientation, for learning. See what it takes to grow in responsible AI maturity and see how it influences your thinking. As maybe you are a leader in your company, and maybe this is going to influence your thinking about how you organize teams or how you think about policy. Maybe you are part of a team that works on AI, and looking at this maturity model is at least going to remind you that, oh, that's why it's been so hard to work with those people from other disciplines. And maybe we should take some time to learn about each other, to learn and to establish a common language so we can collaborate better together. Or, this maturity model could be used for goal setting and for strategic planning. You could, for example, bring leaders from multiple business units around the organization, and together they can look at the maturity model. They can pick the dimensions that are most important to them at a given point in time, discuss what levels they want to aim for on those dimensions, and then make a plan for how to get there. that's what I had in mind, but maybe people can use the maturity model in other ways. And if they do, I'd like to learn how.
Mhm. Okay. Well, should we open it up for questions and discussion?
Yeah, I think if we have any questions, we'd be happy to take them. As a reminder, today we talked about Microsoft's 6 AI principles, our responsible AI standard, and the impact assessment tool that comes with it, and responsible AI maturity model. And so, yeah, I think if people have questions, it would be great to hear them.
Absolutely. And just a reminder, here are the links and the QR code to access these materials and resources that we've talked about today.
Yeah. So it seems that there are no questions so far. I think this is a lot of information for people to go through, but I hope it was really, really useful. And I do hope that there's something to take away from this and something to think about and use as you all work on your building your own products and features with AI.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was great. Thank you, Mickey.
Thank you, John.